Environmentalists say thanks to an international ban on most whaling, the gray whales of Laguna San Ignacio in Baja, Mexico, are living proof that when left alone by man, whales can make a comeback from near extinction. It was 150 years ago here in Laguna San Ignacio when the slaughter of an estimated 18,000 gray whales was said to turn the quiet waters around the lagoon blood red. The American whaler leading the assault, Charles Scammon, left behind personal sketches of his men shooting and harpooning the whales, melting down their blubber for oil lamps. Scammon was later said to be so haunted by the carnage, he gave up whaling and became a naturalist. For the rest of his life advocating that endangered whales around the world be left alone so they might survive to share their majesty with future generations. Today, the gray whales of Laguna San Ignacio have made an extraordinary recovery. Ecotourists permitted here in limited numbers each winter to greet gray whale mothers after their 5,000-mile migration here from Alaska to give birth to their young in these protected waters. Shielded from a new threat facing other whales on the open seas. Military training exercises of the U.S. Navy and other naval forces that environmentalists say threaten marine mammals worldwide. Particularly this screeching sound you're hearing, the high-intensity active sonar used in surveillance of would-be enemy submarines. The same type of sonar particularly effective during the Cold War to track the quiet movements of the Soviet Union's behemoth Typhoon-class submarines. Sonars say environmentalists today that causes fatal mass strandings of frightened and disoriented whales and other marine mammals around the globe. Those most vulnerable are beaked whales that look like large dolphins, sonar disrupting their reliance on echolocation to hunt prey and find mates. Dolphins, too, themselves echolocators impacted by Navy sonar. Sonar that's said to effectively blast their hearing useless. Naval sonar said to have confused and panicked these two beaked whales that fatally stranded, one of them pregnant, her stillborn fetus discovered nearby. Here, a large beaked whale is removed from a beach after stranding and dying from dehydration. The numbers of naval sonar-linked strandings are well documented. In the last 50 years, more than a dozen mass strandings of whales and other marine mammals have made headlines around the world. However, the Navy has historically denied responsibility, claiming that strandings that have taken place during sonar training are often just a coincidence, or claiming underwater earthquakes were to blame for spooking whales to strand, even when earthquakes hadn't actually occurred. The Navy's trump card for the longest time had been that no one could prove sonar damages a whale's hearing because the decomposing state of their carcasses often prevent an accurate examination for cause of death. By the year 2000, then U.S. President George W. Bush, his Vice President Dick Cheney, and Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld all but silenced critics of Navy sonar. As far as this powerful trio was concerned, there wasn't an environmentalist alive who could prove whales were being harmed by Navy sonar. Actually, there was. His name's Ken Balcomb, a reclusive whale researcher who would blow the whistle on Navy sonar. CCTV tracking Balcomb down living northwest of Seattle. Said we'd find him in a town pronounced Squim. Down a road, he said, with a funky name you can't miss. Past the old warplane in his neighbor's front yard, to Balcomb's hangar next door that doesn't have a plane, but a motorhome that doubles as lodging and one of his mobile offices. As senior scientist at the nonprofit Center for Whale Research at whaleresearch.com.
And killer whales right now. One of the whales that we didn't know the sex of You can see the pink Floyd, we call it, hanging out and when he was jumping in the air.
For more than 30 years now, Balcom has been photographing, identifying, and tracking killer whales for an unprecedented survey of the species. With a valued staff and volunteers, he says, dedicated to the study and conservation of the southern resident killer whale, or orca population, in the Pacific Northwest.
Okay, sure. We've got to deal with this issue.
The book War of the Whales by Joshua Horowitz chronicles Balcom's war to save whales from Navy sonar. The story begins on the Bahamas' Abaco Island, March 15, 2000.
I think she's kind of confused in here.
Balcom videotaped by staff aiding a stranded beaked whale. A few miles away, the U.S. Navy had been conducting military exercises with active sonar. And this time, there were plenty of witnesses and credible evidence. The first whale stranding literally 100 feet from Ken Balcom's headquarters here. Balcom and a stunned group of whale enthusiasts he was hosting at the time try for hours to keep the whales from dehydrating and going into cardiac arrest.
The second whale, this one's smaller than the other one.
17 whales and other marine mammals would die that day. 2 days later, the head of one of the whales is examined by a marine mammal specialist on behalf of the U.S. government, who discovers hearing damage consistent with acoustic trauma linked to naval sonar.
This ear is almost completely exposed right now.
Also rushing here at the time to interview Balcom is America's most watched television news program, 60 Minutes, for a world exclusive, Ken Balcom blowing the whistle on Navy sonar. As the cameras roll, Balcom's asked who he thinks is responsible for the strandings. He tells the correspondent, "I believe the Navy did it." All these years later, Balcom says he's still quite certain that had he not witnessed the strandings, the Navy would have denied they happened.
If we had not had video in the Bahamas, that would have never come to surface. It would have been just buried. Nobody'd ever know.
The Navy certainly can't question Balcom's credibility because, after all, Balcom himself was once a young U.S. Navy officer during the Cold War, specializing in, you guessed it, active sonar to track enemy Soviet subs.
I was in the Navy and my job was a paid professional killer. I felt that I gave the Navy and my country the best years of my life, from 26 to 35.
When he left the Navy, Balcom became chief marine scientist aboard the whale research vessel Regina Mattis. For the next 12 years, every winter sailing and studying whales around the world for a nonprofit salary of $1 a year. Colleagues say that's just how passionate Balcom is about whales. Still, Balcom says he took no pleasure that day in the Bahamas blowing the whistle on the Navy he once proudly served.
I didn't ask the Navy to come and have an exercise in front of my house in the Bahamas.
And then, astonishingly, just 3 years later, back here in Washington State, Balcom videotapes the USS Shoup, a Navy destroyer emitting active sonar here in the Haro Strait. A pod of Balcom's killer whales directly in its path. You can hear the sonar through underwater microphones Balcom has connected to audio speakers on land. Behind the camera, Balcom heard on the phone with the U.S. Coast Guard to get the Navy to shut off the sonar.
This is Ken. Can you guys get your Navy to shut that sonar off? It's right in front of our house.
All of this going down in front of Balcom's research headquarters on the San Juan Islands. In the end, 11 harbor porpoises would strand and die that day. Balcom's killer whales, he says he had never seen this rattled before.
Yeah, so here comes the Shoup. It's like deja vu all over again with all these whales that I've studied for 30-some years swimming right to the beach in front of my house. And I thought they were going to all just strand right at my doorstep. I'm seeing everything in this ocean flee for its life from this sound.
You couldn't get any stronger evidence.
No.
Yet the Navy remarkably denies having a vessel here despite Balcom's videotaped evidence of the USS Shoup.
I shot this video and we sent it immediately to the local television. It was on the 5 o'clock news that evening.
The Navy may have spooked a pod of killer whales.
What happened on a new destroyer sent the whales into a frenzy.
And on the 11 o'clock news, the Navy was denying that they had any vessels in the area. And by morning, they had to correct themselves because somebody within the Navy pointed out, hey, wait, we just saw you on television on the 5 o'clock news. You can't deny it.
Balcom says listening to the Navy's repeated denials and having to repeatedly watch whales suffer from Navy sonar has been like watching somebody harm your family and get away with it.
It'd be like if you were at home with your mom and dad and your whole extended family, and somebody came in the door and shot everybody except you, and you didn't, for the rest of your life, do something about that.
When the USS Shoup arrived home, sailors were welcomed home by loved ones. Seemingly no time to talk about Navy sonar killing whales. The U.S. Navy declined CCTV's request for a television interview on the subject of sonar, but defended sonar via email, stating, if the Navy cannot realistically train at sea and test our equipment, sailors' lives and our ability to defend against serious threats will be at risk. Adding, we're committed to meeting our national security mission and protecting marine life by using protective measures. Measures that by law require the Navy to assess potential risks to marine mammals in training areas before receiving permits to do so from federal regulators.
Oh, we're doing everything we can, and this is, like bull. And they know it.
Ken Balcom would find a powerful ally in California environmental attorney Joel Reynolds, who was about to drop a lawsuit depth charge on Navy sonar in federal court. Reynolds, a world traveler and champion of the environment, is described by colleagues as a widely respected eco-lawyer, not afraid to lay out and get dirty for a cause. One closest to him saving whales from naval sonar.
Your support made NRDC a force for nature.
For the last 2 decades, Reynolds has been the point man on whales for the powerful nonprofit environmental watchdog group, Natural Resources Defense Council. With 1.4 million donor members and distinguished board of trustees that include Robert Redford.
In the darkness of the ocean.
The NRDC drumming up worldwide support against naval sonar with public awareness campaigns featuring Reynolds' swashbuckling actor friend Piers Brosnan,
But the U.S. Navy.
warning that naval sonar destroys the hearing whales rely on to find food, migrate, and find mates.
A deaf whale is a dead whale.
I grew up in one of the most polluted places in the world. I learned at an early age.
Reynolds, who grew up in Southern California in Riverside, suffering the smog-choked air of the Los Angeles basin, equates air pollution to the noise pollution or acoustic smog whales suffer from Navy sonar. This analogy Reynolds would later use to convince a U.S. federal court to limit naval sonar training to just 2% of the world's oceans. But Reynolds' legal victory was short-lived. When then-President George W. Bush, after September 11th, would sign an executive order exempting the military from environmental laws protecting whales, that Reynolds contested before the U.S. Supreme Court, which ultimately sided with the U.S. military. Today, Reynolds says he continues pressing the Navy to keep sonar testing as far away as possible from known whale populations and migration routes.
What we're talking about is identifying where the animals are and then avoiding the times when they're there. And that would enable the Navy to do what it needs to do to secure our national defense, but to do it in a more environmentally responsible way.
Reynolds and others have suggested that battle-hardened U.S. naval leaders visit the protected gray whales of Laguna San Ignacio here in Baja, Mexico, for a more intimate understanding of marine mammals. For example, as then Mexican President Ernesto Zedillo had in 2000, when environmentalists warned that a planned salt works project around the lagoon by Mitsubishi would severely impact gray whales.
President Zedillo of Mexico came here in 2000, and he brought his family, and they went out on the lagoon, and they came into this very close personal contact with these magnificent animals. And a month later, he abandoned the project. So that's an example of how our leadership can be affected by this sort of experience. I keep coming back and I marvel at it every time. I never get tired. I've brought my kids here many, many times over the years. It's had an effect on who they are and what they care about.
And others who come here every winter. So smitten with the whales is Dave Smith, a pharmacist from Northern California. He starts singing an old Neil Diamond song in honor of a baby gray Dave's evidently named Caroline.
Sweet Caroline, bum, bum, bum. Good times never seem so good. So good, so good, so good.
Reaching out, touching me, touching you.
Sweet Caroline.
Oh, there's a huge connection.
They have the brains and they probably have the emotions.
These mothers can trust their young to come up and for us to touch them and them learning about probably trust amongst humans. Oh baby, we love you, mama. Come to us, oh baby, oh baby. Cut the whales a break. Yeah, give them room.
The ancestors of these gray whales, say environmentalists, go back 30 million years, long before man was here. Older and wiser and paying their dues far longer than most. That connects with some more than others, like Nan Nemeth on this special day.
Happy birthday.
85. Oh, lovely.
Everyone is affected by it in a very, very fundamental way because of the connection that it allows to the natural world.
You are my sunshine, my only sunshine.
Species that are so extraordinary, so large, so much like dinosaurs, and yet have become a political symbol for the survival of the human race. If we can save the whales, we can save ourselves.
And I know training is important. I mean, I had the finest training available when I was in the Navy. You know, I think they're honorable people. What we have to do is acquaint them with of the knowledge that other people have.
Some of the other males are coming in and trying to get in on the action.
In the annals of the Save the Whales movement, few will ever forget the Greenpeace warriors who took a stand against whaling in 1975. Today, the torch is passed to environmentalists like Joel Reynolds and Ken Balcom, who vow to keep fighting to limit the use of Navy sonar around whales. At the very least, says Balcom, the Navy can no longer deny that sonar-linked strandings do happen.
They know that they're being watched.
Being watched by environmentalists and the public at large. And some would swear that whales are watching too.
Oh, look at her nose.